G'day, Tragic here, and welcome to my final thoughts for Mansions Madness 2nd Edition. Okay, so this is a complicated issue. Basically, I really enjoy Mansions. I really enjoy the original. I've got all the expansions, I've got all the POD, print-on-demand expansions that FFG make, and I've played it quite a lot with a number of different groups. I usually always played the Keeper, but so what I'm going to say is going to sound negative, but I just want to make clear that I actually really enjoy this game, and I enjoy the sequel, which is similar, but it's a very different sec. But Mansions of Madness has an inherent problem, which the sequel has inherited from the original edition, and this problem hasn't been addressed or fixed in any way. And that is, when people look at Mansions of Madness, they see what they believe to be a RPG type experience, and it's not that at all. In fact, Eldritch Horror and Arkham Horror, those kind of games, are actually more RPG-like than Mansions of Madness, because you've got so much freedom of choice. You can go anywhere you want in the town or fly around the world in Eldritch Horror, whatever. There's huge amounts of player choice. But because Mansions of Madness has a timed objective system, like the game gets harder and harder. A lot of the games get harder as they go, but particularly in Mansions of Madness, you can't explore everything. There's just not enough time. And because you have to discover things and the clues lead you to different things, the investigators don't actually have a lot of choice. The very first couple of turns you do, because you're just sort of wandering around blindly, but the more you uncover, and pretty quickly I might add, your choices become completely dictated by the scenario. You have to do this or it's game over. You've got to get that, you've got to go here. And all your choices become directed, and it lacks the very freedom that people associate with RPGs. And this was a big problem with the original game. In a lot of these one versus many games, Descent, all that kind of stuff, Level 7 is a really good one that's not FFG. Basically, those kind of games, they allowed the person playing the Dungeon Master to have a lot more freedom than the people playing the game. And I mean, that's true even with pen and paper, D&D and everything, but it was particularly bad in Mansions of Madness, and it turned a lot of people off. I really enjoyed it, and I think a lot of the fun of Mansions of Madness, the original edition, came from how the Dungeon Master ran the game. You know what I mean? But regardless of that, that's something you have to take into account with the second edition. It's not an RPG, and there isn't a huge amount of choice. It's really, in many ways, it's more of a directed roller than even Arkham Horror is. As in, because in Arkham Horror, you can go anywhere you want. You can make all these decision points. But in Mansion of Madness, you don't have those same decision points. You are kind of directed and forced to act in certain ways. There's no choice in the matter. So you just go here, roll, go here, roll, go here, roll. That being said, the thematic nature of the game is quite interesting and a lot of fun, but also the thematic nature works against it, and this is again a problem with the first edition that the second edition has inherited, and you see this in a lot of heavy story-driven games, Legends of Andor, Mice and Mystics, blah blah blah. And that is, once you've played the scenario and you know the twists and turns of the plot and you know the story and I probably should be at space E5 by turn 3 and that'll make my life a lot easier because every single time you play, you've got to be there. What my point is, the replayability is low, okay? And the way I was hoping Mansions of Madness 2nd Edition would get around this is through the application. So let's talk about the elephant in the room, the application itself. Now, regardless on your opinions about digital integration with board games, it's here to stay. It's only going to become more prevalent and more complex. This is just the beginning. Now, I believe it's going to basically turn into a different genre. We'll see what happens. Who knows? But I am 100% sure that eventually you'll have touchscreen rollable mats that you can just roll out on your table they're like your phone, touchscreen, full video. You can just click a button, it'll set the board up. Maybe even have miniatures that have something on the base so you can move them around the digital map. And, you'll have like a war game and the river would actually be flowing water and all that kind of stuff. That is going to happen 100%. Get over it. Regardless of whether that's good or bad, it's happening. And this is the first stages of that. And I was quite curious to see how it would happen. There's been a few app integrated games recently from a number of different companies, but none of them have really grabbed my attention. I thought Mansion of Madness would be a great opportunity to test it out because I really enjoy the first game and I never get to play it anymore because one versus many games are not in favor with my personal gaming group at the moment. We just don't play them because we have a couple of members hate co-op. They just can't stand co-op. They're very combative players. So I thought this is a great way to revive a game that I love, get to play it as an investigator. So what do I think of this app? The truth is, I think it was a huge missed opportunity by FFG. This app is not nearly as complex as it should have been. It's missing what I would have considered to be no-brainer, obvious design choices. For example, and this was actually pointed out to me by Scott, who's a guy who watches my videos and comments a lot. Anyone who comments is just a legend in my eye. But he actually helps me out with rules all the time too, so he's a bit of a legend. And he said something very poignant, I thought, which is, in real-world card games, like real game, there's a kind of shorthand in the way card text is written. You know, they truncate sentences, they use lots of keywords, they use lots of symbols, all this kind of stuff to truncate the language so it can fit on the physical space of the components, the cards or the board or whatever. But the application has no such restrictions. There's no reason for it to talk in this, a lot of the confusion in rules and, people arguing, rules lawyers, that all comes from this sort of shorthand. And the application is written in that way, and there's no need for it. It could be written in very plain English. And not just plain English, it should be written thematically, We should have stories, like in Arkham Horror, you flip a card and it's got like a little story. Each of those stories could be long. You don't want them too long, but, instead of just saying, a monster licks its lips, roll for horror, it could tell a story, and an interactive story. And that is what we're missing. The application is not interactive at all, not even remotely. Basically what the app is a digital deck of cards. That's all it is. So like in Arkham Horror, you have all those cards for the locations. You flip a card, you read it, you do whatever the card says. That is all the app does. That's it. I mean, it does. The only interaction it seems to have is that it has some kind of variable that takes your character name. So it actually mentions character just by name, which is cool, but it's not nearly enough. I mean, if you have Mandy Thompson in your group, why isn't there a Mandy Thompson story? Or like you have like 5 stories minimum, maybe write 10 stories. You don't have to make too many, but have 10 personalized stories that you can insert different characters into that are interactive with you being that character. That's just off the top of my head. I mean, there's so many things you can do. When you open doors, we should have thematic textual narrative, not just the door opens, move one space in. And I think this is a huge problem with this application, is that people were expecting, because already people are expecting an RPG experience, but then people were expecting an interactive experience with this application, because the application theoretically allows them to do so much more that the board games can't. See, with Mansions of Madness First Edition, you had to buy all these cool, I enjoyed it. You'd buy all these expansions and you'd buy all these, pods and stuff, because the actual quests are written in rule books printed on paper. So it makes sense that, if you want new quests, you had to design them yourself, or you had to get new things. But with the application, why aren't the quests more variant every time you play it? Like if I play Escape from Innsmouth again, and I've done it a few times, done it about 4 or 5 click-throughs since I finished it, it's exactly the same. No difference. I mean, there's like the NPC, the drunk NPC moves position. That's the only variable that I could find. It has a few different endings depending on how much evidence you collect, but regardless, why isn't the mansion randomized? Why isn't there like, different configurations of the tiles at least? I mean, and that's the thing. I mean, I was expecting the application to beat one of the big problems with the original, which was that because all the rules and everything were printed on paper, the quests were static. And I figured, this is an application, this quest won't be static. Now, in their defense, I also clicked just a couple of, I didn't want to spoil it, so I sort of clicked, a couple of turns into the setup and the first turn of a couple of the different quests. And some of them are randomized. Some of them do have randomized things, which is good, but I just seem to have picked one that worked. But even so, it's not enough. And I just think that's my biggest gripe with the application. Well, that's not actually my biggest gripe, but that is one of the big gripes of the application, is that I was expecting some kind of interaction, and the interaction isn't there. It is literally just a digital deck of cards. And because it's digital, you feel disconnected from the game. It's like you stop playing the game to use the app, and then you stop using the app to use the game, and it creates a disconnect between the gaming experience between me and the game, because there's like these two unrelated separate things when they should be completely tied together, I mean, it's a computer game. They could do anything. I mean, you know how complicated computer games are. There should be actual interaction. Like when you're talking to someone, when you're speaking to them, why isn't it like an interesting dialogue tree with different choices? Why don't your actions affect what happens in the game? It doesn't affect it practically at all. And that was a huge downside, that, non-interaction. The other thing I dislike about the app, by the way, is that they didn't release an editor. And I mean, they've got to release an editor at point, right? Not being able to make our own quests sucks big time. Okay, so that all sounds very negative, which it is. But let's actually look at what the game is. Basically, if you own the first edition, buying the second edition is a complete no-brainer. Go out and buy it tomorrow. I think of it as an expansion that adds a new game mode. And that's pretty cool. I mean, it's an expensive expansion, but it's an expansion nonetheless. You can still play the 1 versus many. You can still do the new version. And what's interesting is the first 2 expansions for second edition are actually just the content from the original editions. Now, we know that the application, it's already been announced, are going to release new quests through the App Store. So you pay like $2 or whatever, and you get new quests. And many of these quests will not require you to have new content. So because we've got the base set, we've got all the boards and monsters from the original expansions and everything, theoretically, I should be able to buy lots of quests without buying any more components. So you actually get a huge amount of game for original edition owners, which is very cool. So if you're original edition owner, go out and buy it. And you enjoy the game, go out and buy it. End of story. For people who aren't original edition owners, I don't think there's any reason to buy the old editions. I love the 1 versus many aspect. I like the Dungeon Master stuff. And there is some complications that come from that make it harder to get to the table. It also has some definite advantages. Like one of the things with the application is all the components in the physical game of second edition are generic, and all the like the question marks and all that kind of stuff. And all the other stuff is in the application is where the quest individuality comes. But in the original expansions, you had all the, like Forbidden Alchemy, you had these weird potions and, all these new mechanics. Like in the King in Yellow, you could like join a play, become part of a cult. Had all these unique mechanics per quest, and they even had their own unique tokens. Now, you don't have any of that in this second edition yet. So that's a bit of a bummer, you know what I mean? Like it lacks, it's sort of like this generic shell of a game, and then this kind of non-interactive app that runs it. And what I'm trying to say here is that if you don't own the first edition, I would suggest waiting to buy this until the first big box expansion comes out, which has been announced, and the first set of downloadable quests have come out, just so you can see what kind of stuff they're going to be adding. Because the price tag's quite large, and I feel that while I enjoy this game a lot, and I had a lot of fun playing that playthrough, I feel that the potential of this game is not lived up to yet. And it's not until there's going to be more items, and there's going to be, because what you buy the expansion, you'll tick I've got that expansion in the application, and suddenly you'll have all these extra items and spells that can be randomly given to you at the start, or all that kind of stuff. So once once this expansion comes out, and maybe they'll introduce some interesting mechanics, some new things that are specific per quest, which is what the game is really missing, is specific variants on each quest, like Forbidden Alchemy is the one I keep talking about because I love that quest, the original series. Like, you've got potions and you have potion mixing and you can turn into creatures, yeah. So I feel that there's just a lot of missed opportunity here. And while this sort of discussion sounds very, very negative, I have to stress that I enjoy the game. So much so that I'm literally starting a new playthrough of the next quest as we speak. So I finished the game, boom, playing a second thing. You don't do that with games you dislike. And it is extremely good for solo players and for people like me that enjoy the original but never get to play it because you need a dungeon master. That's why I don't play Descent. I sold my copy of Descent version 2 before the app was invented because I was just collecting these one versus many games out of some kind of habit and they never got to the table. So there's a lot of positive stuff, and if they can get the app to be more interactive, like say if you're playing the father, his actions should be reflected in the game text. Obviously, this would make the quest harder to write, but I think why make it an application in the first place if you're not going to take advantage of the variable nature of computers? I don't know. It just seems like a huge missed opportunity. So to sum up, the game is good. The game is exactly what it says it was going to be. There are some problems with a disconnect where you kind of stop playing to use the app. The app is more just a deck of cards, which is disappointing. And if you have the original set, buying the new set is a no-brainer. Go out and buy it tomorrow. I'm assuming you like the game because it's sort of like just an expansion that adds a new game mode. But if you're not an owner of the original, I would wait until the first big box expansion comes out to see what kind of developments they're going to add to this game. Is this going to be is it going to be like it is now forever, or are they going to start putting in new mechanics? They're going to put in quests that are different, physically different mechanics per quest, new tokens, we'll have to find out. And also I want to see how they're going to handle the downloadables as well. So I think there's a lot of potential here, but I just don't think it's quite ready there for new players. I would wait until Anyway, that's my thoughts on Mansion of Madness 2nd edition and numbers 12 this time. And I will see you guys next